Part 26. The Terminator. South Laguna, 7:18 p.m. From an embankment behind the house, Miles Dyson was a clear target, with his back to the study window, sitting before his terminal, buried in his work on Lot 2. The only illumination in the room was the bluish glow of his CRT monitor. A dark figure crept up the ivy-encrusted hill. Sarah raised the Car-15 rifle and began screwing the long, heavy cylinder of a sound suppressor onto the end of the barrel. Danny and Blythe were playing in the halls with a radio-controlled toy off-road truck. Danny drove the Bigfoot and Blythe scampered after, trying to catch it. They stopped in the hall outside Dyson's study and saw him working at his desk. Danny put a finger to his lips, shushing Blythe, his expression mischievous. With the suppressor in place, Sarah eased back the bolt and then slipped it forward, chambering a .223 round. Then she lay down on the embankment. Her cheek pressed against the cool rifle stock. She slid one hand slowly forward to brace the weapon, taking the weight on her elbow. The other hand moved knowingly to the trigger. She looked through the scope at the man in the house, raised the rifle. It wasn't a man. It was another pivot of fate, a catch in the flow of time that had to be removed, plucked out of reality before he destroyed it. Sarah knew she could do this, that it would be remarkably easy, just a mechanical pull of the trigger, a mere quarter-inch movement, and the man would be knocked out of the game. And then millions could live without fear of annihilation. Dyson was not aware of the soft, rhythmic sounds of the keys as he typed. His mind was focused only on the symbols on the screen shift. It was becoming a certainty that this would be the last image in his mind before it exploded outward onto the CRT. A glowing red dot appeared on his back, the target dot of Sarah's laser designator. It moved silently up his back, towards his head. Sarah's eye was pressed against the nightscope. She had a steady, even breathing pattern going on. The target dot hardly shifted against the target. The target. Her finger tightened on the trigger, slowly taking out the slack, and she held a deep breath. It was time to make it go away. The laser dot jiggled slightly on the back of Dyson's neck and then steadied on the back of his skull. Danny's Bigfoot station wagon roared along the carpet and encountered a solid obstacle with a thump. Dyson's foot. The scientist jerked, startled back to earth in a sudden plummet from the Promethean heights of calculus, and leaned down to pick up the truck. The glass window behind him suddenly erupted inward, spraying his back with glass. He felt, or rather sensed, something very small and very fast whizzing by his ear. Then his monitor screen imploded in a shower of sparks. He fell off the chair, utterly shocked, and looked up at the large hole in the window. This saved him, because, ka-thump, the second shot blew the top of his high-backed chair into an explosion of stuffing an inch from his head. Instinctively, he flung himself down to the carpet. Rounds blasted through the window, tearing into his desk and computer, blowing his keyboard into shrapnel. With the monitor blasted out, the room was now in darkness. Sarah could no longer see clearly. Dyson crawled behind the desk as round after round poured in, blasting one side of it into kindling. Dyson, face jammed against the carpet, terrified, saw something even more horrifying. His kids standing confused and scared in the hall. "Run, kids! Go! Run!" Teresa had heard the shots a moment before and had no idea what they were. At first, she thought firecrackers. July was not far away and maybe kids were celebrating early. But then she heard the broken glass and stopped thinking or guessing or doing anything except leaping up from the couch and racing through the house like an out-of-control locomotive, searching for her kids. She hit a corner at a dead run and saw them coming her way, wailing. She enfolded them in her arms and then continued cautiously down the hall, peering around the corner into the study. Dyson was still on the floor amid the splinters and shrapnel of the continuing fusillade. "Miles! Oh my God! Stay back!" Dyson flinched as chunks of wood and shattered computer components showered down on him. He looked desperately towards the door, but knew he'd be totally exposed. He'd never make it. On the embankment, Sarah's rifle emptied with a final clack. She threw it down and drew her .45 smoothly from a shoulder holster. She rose and started towards the house, snapping back the slide on the pistol, chambering around. And it was easy, easier than making love or giving birth or writing a poem. It was necessary and so damn easy to kill, if you didn't think about it. From under his Swiss cheese desk, Dyson saw a sliver of the backyard. Someone was walking towards him. The combat boots hit the ground with assurance, coming onward without pause. He tensed to make a break for the hall door. Sarah raised the pistol, eyes riveted ahead of the shattered study window, still regulating her breathing for the next round of shots. Dyson sprung to his feet in a full tilt sprint. Too calmly, she tracked him. She could not possibly miss. But this was a time of impossibilities. Dyson hooked a foot on the cord of a toppled disk drive just as her shot blew apart a lamp where his head was. He hit the floor hard, but kept moving, scrambling forward. There was a crunch of glass behind him. He could not avoid the powerful need to see who was trying to kill him. He shot a frantic look over his shoulder as his arms and legs continued carrying him across the floor. He was as surprised as could be to see a strange woman, dressed in fatigues, framed in the floor-to-ceiling window, re-aiming the pistol in her hand, right at him. Teresa was screaming hysterically. His sense of reality was rupturing along the fault lines of fear. It propelled him towards the hall in a sudden, powerful lunge. Her next shot ploughed into him and threw him forward onto the floor in the hallway. Dyson struggled forward, stunned. Teresa gaped down at her wounded husband. There was a .45 caliber hole clean through his left shoulder. He smeared the beige wall with dark blood as he staggered up. He turned and blearily saw the woman walking through the study after him, relentless, grimly determined to take his life away. He was mesmerized for an instant by the adrenaline rush flash frame of her impassive expression. He wasn't even human to her. He was meat, and she was the tenderizer. He almost wanted to take the bullet, compelled by a lockup in his hyperbiological reaction to the threat. Fight or run. Or perhaps he was fighting the pattern of destiny, and it wanted him dead. But momentum helped him live a few moments longer. He toppled through a doorway as her shots tore away the molding where he just was. Outside, the Terminator and John roared up onto the grass of Dyson's house and leapt from the Bronco, sprinting towards the house. John despaired when he heard several shots ring out, muffled from outside. "Shit! We're too late!" Teresa held the children close as she backed into the living room. Sarah was following Dyson as he stumbled down the hall towards them. Danny broke loose and ran to his father's side. Teresa held on to Blythe and screamed at Danny to get back. But the boy was hurtling himself at his father, wailing, "Daddy!" Teresa impulsively dropped Blythe and ran to her husband and her son, throwing her arms around both of them. Sarah loomed behind them with the pistol aimed and cocked. Teresa howled, "No!" Sarah hesitated for the first time, the steel in her veins glowing from the heat of the moment. She yelled, "Don't fucking move! Don't fucking move!" Then she swung the gun on Teresa. "Get on the floor! Now! Fucking down! Now!" Sarah was crazy-eyed now, shaking with the intensity of the moment. The kill had gone bad, with screaming kids and the wife involved. Things she never figured on. Teresa dropped to her knees, terrified, as she looked into the muzzle of the gun. Blythe flung her little arms around Dyson. Her small voice quavered as she yelled, "Leave my daddy alone!" The momentum was so powerful. She wanted to pull the trigger, needed to pull the trigger. "Shut up, kid! Get out of the way!" Dyson looked up, through his pain and incomprehension. Why was this happening? Money, insanity, cultist? The black gun muzzle was now only a foot from his face. He cried out impulsively, "Please, let the kids go! Shut up! Shut up, motherfucker! It's all your fault! It's your fault!" And now it wasn't quite so easy, because she was too close and had hesitated too long. She could see his eyes, and he was no longer the target. He was a human being, like her. She needed something the Terminator never needed. Hate. For a man she didn't even know. Blinking, she rapidly wiped sweat out of her eyes with one hand, then got it back on the gun. The .45 was trembling. She registered the faces of Dyson, Teresa, Blythe, Danny. The family. Cringing in terror at their fate, and she was its executioner. Sarah took a sharp breath, and all the muscles in her arms contracted as she tensed to fire. But her finger wouldn't move. The cold steel and the hot fire simply evaporated, and she was left with nothing to carry her through the awful moment. Very slowly, she lowered the gun, dropping it to her side. It was over. All the breath and energy steamed out of her, and she weakly raised her other hand in a strange gesture, as if to say, "Stay where you are, don't move." As if, should they move, the fragile balance might tip back the other way. She backed away from them, panting, as if backing away in terror from what she had almost done. She reached a wall and slumped against it, sliding down to her knees. The gun fell limply from her fingers, thudding onto the carpet. She rested her cheek against the wall. It was all really over, and there was nothing she could do. Nothing. The front door was kicked in. The Terminator stepped inside. John grabbed his sleeve and pushed past him, scoping out the situation in 2 seconds. Sarah, the gun, the sobbing family. John moved to his mother while the Terminator knelt next to Dyson and began checking his shoulder. Tears were spilling down Sarah's cheeks, tears that she no longer knew how to hold back, from a spring she thought was long dry. John tentatively reached for her. "Mom, you okay?" I couldn't. Oh God. She seemed to see him for the first time. "You came here to stop me." He nodded, expecting the worst harangue of his life about how important he was to the future and how he shouldn't take risks But she surprised him, reaching for his shoulders and drawing him into a fierce embrace. A great sob welled up from deep inside. His arms slid around her neck, and they held one another as the spasms racked her. This was all John ever wanted, all he had lived for. And now the tears burned in his eyes, and his throat tightened, so that he could barely get out the words. "It's okay, Mom. It'll be okay. We'll figure it out." She whispered into his ear, "I love you, John. I always have." His heart raced, and he kissed her flushed cheek. "I know, Mom. I know." Teresa was gaping at the bizarre tableau. The blood on the walls, the weeping children, the woman and the boy clinging to one another, sobbing, and the large man wordlessly ripping open her husband's blood-stained shirt and examining the wound as if he'd expected all this to happen. The man turned to her and calmly said, "Clean penetration, no shattered bone. Compression should control the loss of blood." Wonderful news, she was thinking, dazed, as he took her hands and pressed them firmly over the entrance and exit wounds. "Do you have bandages?" Dyson was feeling the damage now, in great pounding throbs. "In the bathroom. Danny, can you get them for us?" He tried to sound perfectly normal, not to show the pain, so his children would calm down. Danny nodded somberly and ran down the hall. John reluctantly pulled away from Sarah. She wiped at her tears, the instinct to toughen up taking over again. But she knew the healing moment would have its effect, nevertheless. John stood by the Terminator. Dyson squinted up at his surreal house guests. "Who are you people?" John drew the biker's knife from the Terminator's boot, handed it to him. "Show him." The Terminator removed his jacket to reveal powerful bare arms. John took Blythe by the hand and led her down the hall, away from what was about to happen. She'd had enough trauma for one night. Teresa started to protest, to follow, but she couldn't remove her hand from her husband's wounds. She could feel the blood wanting to spurt between her fingers. But then, a new level of terror flooded her senses as she watched the big man raise the large, flat knife and plunge it into his forearm, making a deep cut just below the elbow. In one smooth motion, the Terminator sliced all the way around his arm. With a second cut, he split the skin of the forearm from elbow to wrist and quickly stripped it off like a surgeon ripping off a rubber glove. It came off with a sucking rip, leaving a bloody skeleton. Teresa bit her bottom lip, straining to hold back a scream. Dyson gasped. The skeleton was made of bright metal and laced with hydraulic actuators. The fingers were as finely crafted as watch parts. They flexed into a fist and extended. The Terminator held it up, palm out. And Dyson knew now what Lot 1 was, because there was another metal arm, held in almost the exact position as this one, in the vault at Cyberdyne. "My God," he said quietly. The Terminator lowered his arm. "Now listen very carefully," he commanded. Later, in the Dyson's kitchen, Sarah was sitting on the counter, her face in her hands, breathing deeply and slowly, gradually pulling herself back together. John sat near her. She could feel the heat of his body, and it was what she needed to ground her. Teresa was holding Blythe in her arms. Danny was curled up on a blanket on the floor. The children had listened until they could resist sleep no longer. Dyson was listening, face lit from the single overhead light, looking like that guy on the Sistine Chapel wall, the damned soul. Eyes fixed and staring with terrifying knowledge. His shoulder was bandaged. The Terminator's arm was wrapped with a blood-soaked bandage below the elbow. The steel forearm and hand gleamed in the harsh kitchen light. Dyson listened while the Terminator laid it all down. Skynet, Judgment Day. The history of things to come. It's not every day you find out you're responsible for 3 billion deaths. He took it pretty well, considering. Finally, Dyson said, "I feel like I'm going to throw up." He looked at them, clenching the table, as if he were about to blow away. His face, his posture, his ragged voice expressed soul-wrenching terror. He had been ripped out of normal life into their grim nightmare. His voice was pleading. "You're judging me on things I haven't even done yet. Jesus, how are we supposed to know?" Sarah spoke from the shadows behind them. She was looking right at him, but really through him, thinking of most of the men she'd known, excepting Salceda and Kyle, and the words came tumbling out, fired by the long-repressed rage she felt for the outrageous human slaughter that had been going on since the beginning. Yeah, right. How were you supposed to know? All you know how to do is thrust into the world with your fucking ideas and your weapons. Did you know that every gun in the world is named after a man? Colt, Browning, Smith, Thompson, Kalashnikov. Men built the hydrogen bomb, not women. Men like you thought it up. Oh, you're so creative. You don't know what it's really like to create something, to create a life, to feel it growing inside of you. All you know how to do is create death, you fucking bastards. John touched her trembling hand and said, Mom, we need to be more constructive here. I don't see this as a gender-related issue. He turned to the Dysons. She's still a little tense. Then he turned back to Sarah. We still have to figure out how to stop all this from happening, right? But I thought, Teresa said, confused. I mean, aren't we changing things? Right now? Changing the way it goes? Dyson sat up. That's right. There's no way I'm going to finish the new processor now. Forget it. I'm out of it. I'm quitting Cyberdyne tomorrow. I'll sell real estate. I don't care. That's not good enough. Dyson's voice was pitiful. Look, whatever you want me to do, I'll do. I just want my kids to have a chance to grow up, okay? No one must follow your work, the cyborg said. All right. Yeah, you're right. We have to destroy the stuff at the lab, the files, disk drives, and everything I have here. Everything. I don't care. Teresa took his hand and he looked at her. She had never seen such love there. Later, in Dyson's backyard, a fire roared in a metal trash barrel. Stacks of files were dumped onto it. The Terminator poured lighter fluid liberally over the fire, which flared up, lighting his face demonically. Sarah, Dyson, Teresa, and John returned from the office with more stuff. Files, notes, optical discs. Even the kids were carrying stuff, and it all went into the fire. Dyson dropped the prototype processor onto the fire, his eyes hollow and distant. He stared into the flames, watching his world burning. Then had a sudden thought. Do you know about the chip? What chip? Sarah asked. They have it in a vault at Cyberdyne. He turned to the Terminator. It's got to be from the other one, like you. The cyborg turned to Sarah. The CPU from the first Terminator. Son of a bitch! I knew it! She hissed. They told us not to ask where they got it. I thought, Japan? Hell, I don't know. I didn't want to know. It was scary stuff, radically advanced. It was shattered, it didn't work. But it gave us ideas, it took us in new directions, things we would never have thought of. All this work is based on it. It must be destroyed, the Terminator said. Sarah grabbed Dyson's arm, her eyes reflecting the flames. Can you get us in there, past security? I think so, yeah. When? Dyson looked at her, the Terminator, and then John. Saw his answer in their faces. Now? He took a breath. Yeah, right. He turned to his wife. Her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes were strong and clear. She put her hand on his arm and said, Miles, I'm scared. Okay, but the only thing that scares me more than you going is you not going. He nodded. She was right, of course. Sarah turned to the Terminator. Is it safe for them here? For an answer, the Terminator turned to Teresa and said, Take your kids, go to a hotel. Right now, don't pack. Then he turned to the others. Let's go.